Hello, everyone. Welcome to Alert Media's webinar on winter weather, forecast, and business impacts. I'm Katie Goen, Director of Content and Communications at Alert Media, and I'll be your moderator today. And so, why are we here today? Well, winter is upon us, and many folks in the US have already experienced some impacts from the winter weather season. So today we're just here to give you an insider look at what forecasters are expecting this season so that you can stay weather-wise and prepare your business and your people. So with that, I'd love to introduce you to today's speakers. First, I'd like to welcome our featured guest, Jason Moreland. He's the in-house senior meteorologist at Alert Media. Jason graduated from the University of South Alabama with a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology. His professional experience within the private sector includes more than a decade of extensive domestic, international, and offshore forecasting. And throughout his career, Jason has provided critical decision-making support to a wide range of businesses, live event venues, and even sensitive utility and offshore projects. So hi, Jason. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, thank you, Katie. Glad to be here to discuss such an important topic today.
Absolutely. Well, I'd also like to welcome Sara Pratley. Sara is Senior Vice President of Global Intelligence at Alert Media, where she leads a team of experienced analysts to monitor emerging threats and incidents just worldwide. And prior to Alert Media, Sara was the Vice President of National News for CNN's domestic news gathering unit. And she led the network's coverage of just major events like the Boston Marathon bombings, Orlando Pulse nightclub shootings, and many natural disasters and severe weather events. So during her decade there at the network, she gained this unique ability to assess, analyze, and decipher information quickly, which is a skill set we are happy that she brought to Alert Media. So hello, Sara. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Katie. Thanks so much. Excited to be here and happy to dive in.
Excellent. Well, I just want to quickly review today's agenda before we get started. First, we're going to talk about last year's winter season. We'll discuss the early season forecast for this winter. We're going to talk about some potential impacts of winter weather, and then some best practices for preparing your people and your businesses for those potential impacts. But before we get into any of that, I would love to go ahead and launch our first poll. And we would love for you guys to participate in all the polls today. It just really helps us get a better understanding of your primary concerns, especially as we get deeper into the winter season. So the question that you see here is, what are your company's primary concerns this winter season? And this is, you can select all that apply. It doesn't just have to be one. So it could be that property or facility damage, protecting on-site employees, protecting dispersed or remote employees. Maybe it's that communication component, communicating before, during, and after a winter storm, or maybe business continuity post-storm. So I will give you just another few seconds. Looks like we still have some answers coming in here. All right, let's go ahead and end that poll and we can share some results. Well, everything is represented here, which is great, but it looks like the two biggest concerns for people are communication and protecting their on-site employees. So I'm going to go to you first there, Jason. Is that surprising to you, or is that about what you thought you'd see?
Yeah, the main thing is I'm glad just to see such a variety of responses, because we've seen impacts as it pertains to these, with every single major winter storm, whether it's communication during and after the storm, or property and facility damage, roof collapses due to heavy snowfall, you name it. Every single one of those can be checked off as we look at each one of these prior winter weather events in recent years.
That makes sense. And Sara, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say kind of the communications piece. It definitely feels like everybody's looking forward to being able to get some support there, something we can certainly help with, but incredibly important right through every phase of the storm.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to move on now to the 2022-2023 winter season in review. So Jason, I'm going to kick it over to you. Jason's going to review some trends, last year's winter weather, and the early season forecast for this season. So Jason, all yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. So I always like to start these winter weather preparedness webinars with a look back at the prior year to see what we dealt with, and maybe we can learn some lessons from some of those prior storms. So, to start things off, this is the 3 month winter average of the 2022 winter 2023 season. And you can see the temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. And just by looking at that graphic on the left, you would kind of go under the impression that maybe there wasn't much in the way of winter weather mischief to worry about whatsoever, especially if you were living along or east of the Mississippi River. Um, this was out of 128 years of record keeping, the 17th warmest U.S. winter on record. If you were to specify and talk mostly about the Northeast United States, it was definitely within the top 10 for warmest on record. The only places across the country that over that 3 month period turned out to be a little bit cooler than average was across the Sierra Nevada mountains out there across California, some of the Intermountain West. And when I say that, I'm talking about Nevada into Utah and Colorado, but a good eastern chunk, 2/3 of the country finished well above normal for the year. But the other notable thing was that it was also the 21st wettest. So definitely in the upper third in terms of wettest winters nationwide. And really, the area that took the full brunt of storms was from California through the southern and central Rockies and then northeastward towards Minnesota and the Great Lakes. We've kind of gotten things to an easy start here so far in this winter 23, winter 24 season. There's been some winter weather systems, but between November and December, about 12 months ago, there was already a multitude of winter storm warnings and blizzard type weather systems that had gone through the northern plains by this date. So it's been kind of a slower start to the winter, even compared to last year. But of course, there's some indications that we're going to pick up the pace as we get deeper into the winter months, and we'll talk more about that. But just to throw some more stats at you, again, parts of Minnesota was one of the second wettest times that they've had on record for the winter months. And then across the east, Mississippi River, many locations east of there, a lot of the states had their top 10 warmest weather ever. So that's a look at least the 3 month summary of those conditions. But as we advance, you can tell that, we were still dealing with multiple major systems last winter, despite overall warmer than usual weather. The funny thing is that December, for much of the month, was pretty warm across the east, but all it really takes is a 5 to 10 day breakdown in the weather pattern for all, having to break loose here. And we saw that certainly across Buffalo. There was a very deep area of low pressure within the mid levels of the atmosphere, very cold temperatures aloft in the mid to upper levels over still relatively warm waters of the Great Lakes early in the winter months. And during the early to mid part of December, you can still have a good chunk of the Great Lakes that are not iced over yet. So you still have the temperature contrast between relatively warm water near the lake surface and much colder weather associated with these upper level storm systems that come across. And if the wind flow comes off the lake at a certain trajectory, you can see a swath of locally major snow totals. And these snow bands can sit over a specific county or two for multiple days on end. And I know that Buffalo is a rather resilient town when it comes to major snow events. Every year, without fail, there's major lake effect snow events, but this was historically one of the worst that they've ever seen. Within a 3 to 5 day period, they had over 52 inches of snow at Buffalo Airport. There were hurricane force wind gusts at times pushing 70 to 80 miles per hour. Blizzard conditions, when you combine the effects of the snow and the wind, 36 hours straight of nearly whiteout conditions there. You basically couldn't travel through the city. There were travel bans in place. And, this also happened around the holiday season. And even though that this was a well forecast event, a lot of people can't help but try to go visit their family, or maybe they tried to get to work. Maybe they're considered essential personnel. A lot of people got caught on the highways in the middle of this thing and needed to be rescued. So with that, over 40 fatalities were recorded in Erie County alone. Just a very devastating situation. In fact, across Western New York in total, there were 47 deaths. And just to break down some of these impacts a little bit more, this is a great example of what you can maybe prepare for with some of these more extreme events. There were 18 fatalities. Of those, they were found out in the open in the snow elements. So maybe they went to go get help. Maybe their vehicle was stranded. Maybe they were without power in their home. They venture into the storm. Conditions are worse than they anticipate. And then they succumb to the impacts of cold temperatures and snow. At least 12 deaths are confirmed from loss of power and heating. So imagine you're days on end in, sub-zero wind chill temperatures, blizzard conditions outside. There's not going to be power restoration efforts anytime soon. It's not safe enough for people to get out there in bucket trucks to restore the power quickly. And so lack of heating, that's a major concern during these multi-day duration storm systems. At least 4 people were found passed away in their cars. That goes back to what we had talked about with people still trying to venture out into an extreme weather system like this. And at least 7 people also died due to a delayed EMS response. Even the ambulances and fire trucks were getting caught up in this, even though, 4-wheel drive and everything. There's only so much that you can do, though, when there's 5 feet of snow and 15-foot snow drifts on the side of the road. So citywide driving bans were in place for 5.5 days. The airport closed for 5 days. Wind chill, -30 below zero. Worst case scenario for Buffalo, unprecedented situation there. So that was just the start of this crazy last 5 to 10 days of the month of December. If we advance to the next slide, this was part of a much bigger Arctic blast that impacted the eastern 2/3 of the country. And again, remember, the month as a whole for December was above normal for much of the country, and yet we still was able to get a system like this for about a 5-day stretch. This was basically from December 21st through December 25th. At one point, there were over 1.4 million people without power. The overall total number of customers impacted over the span of several days was likely much greater than that. This was just a small snapshot during the event. Due to some of these water main breaks due to extreme cold temperatures, Jackson, Mississippi, they still have a compromised infrastructure when it comes to their water treatment facilities. The weather was starting to impact things once again across central Mississippi in that regard. And then just unprecedented wind chills for multiple days into Chicago and even as far south as Tennessee. So when we combine the Erie County event along with this widespread below normal weather across the country, there were at least 87 confirmed fatalities during this period. And then one other thing really quickly, during the holiday travel season, we all think about the airports. But with all of this weather happening in unison across the country, there were over 15,000 flights canceled. This was also the time in which Southwest Airlines had an outage. Part of that was due to weather, part of it was due to other infrastructure related issues, but certainly this time of the year, weather is going to exacerbate and cascade all of those impacts. And so that's always something we need to watch out for, especially during the winter months. If we go ahead and then take a look at this slide, this is more illustrative of what we saw along the West Coast. And really, aside from some Arctic outbreaks across the Northeast, it was really the state of California that took things on the chin last year. So there were pros and cons to this, right? Because going into the winter, still had exceptional drought across much of California. There was still the anticipation that La Nina was going to hold on throughout the winter months. Usually, La Nina actually promotes below average precipitation across Southern California. The Climate Prediction Center from NOAA was actually forecasting below normal precipitation going into last winter across the southern half of the state. But as we've learned, no two El Ninos or no two La Ninas ever behave exactly the same. And we saw exactly the outcome here with a record period of precipitation across California, some of the wettest periods in recorded history, in fact, for central parts of the state. 21 confirmed fatalities. Some of this was related to river flooding. Other parts of it were related to extreme snowfall within the Sierra Nevada mountains. People were trapped in their homes all the way into March because there was just one atmospheric river event after another. So that's a bit of a summary of what we saw in California. Then, of course, across the Southeast, when we do have these warm spells, that also promotes above normal severe weather activity. When you're on the warmest sector of these mid-latitude storm systems, you get more wind shear, more instability, you get more tornadoes. There was an EF3 on the north side of Harris County near Houston, Texas. There were also significant tornadoes in Alabama. In fact, Alabama broke their record for the most tornadoes ever recorded for the month of January. So even though we think about the spring months as the time for damaging winds, hail, and tornadoes, when you get these brief warm-up periods during the winter, you can have severe weather outbreaks, especially across the Southeast and the Tennessee Valley. So that's, just a microcosm of what we saw during those periods. And then finally, as we got into February, even though, again, much of the U.S. was pretty warm, we had this couple-day Arctic outbreak that really focused in on the New England area, some of the coldest temperatures ever recorded. Mount Washington up to -108 for the wind chill. That is likely the coldest wind chill ever recorded across the country. And then in more populated areas like Boston, the actual temperature dropped down to -10. The prior all-time record before that was -2. So again, this is all within an overall warm winter weather regime that you're still getting massive disruptive Arctic outbreaks. So that's something to be mindful of, even when we are seeing these warming climate trends. And again, this is just a microcosm of what we saw last year. There were also big ice storms that once again penetrated as far south as Tennessee. Texas, Memphis had multiple days of power outages due to ice storms with an inch of ice caked on branches and tree limbs, and the rest goes on and on. In terms of long-term winter weather trends, beyond what we just saw over the past 12 months, we've seen, even dating back to 2021, there have been times in which winter-related deaths are more than twice the 10-year average. If you think about the deep freeze event in Texas a couple of years ago, fatalities related to that certainly spiked. But overall, colder than normal winters are becoming less common in the last 20 to 30 plus years, and warm temperatures continue to outpace cold records. But my main point here is that even if the winter months turn out to be above normal, you can still have major winter storms and major Arctic outbreaks that are highly disruptive. And then one element that's not even so much weather forecast related, something that we need to be mindful of when preparing, is that the country is dealing with an aging power grid. A lot of the infrastructure that we still see today was put in 20 to 30 years ago, and we are starting to see the negative effects of that with an increase in the number of power outages year over year. So that's kind of a bit of the trends that we've seen in recent years. But the big thing that I wanted to hit home here was the energy winter weather crisis. These are snapshots of some of the events that took place during some of those Arctic outbreaks into the eastern US. Even though these were 2 to 3 day periods in most cases, there were calls for rolling blackouts, conservation of electricity. The grid is pretty well prepared for normal weather, but during these massive cold snaps that are well below normal, and especially the ones that last for more than just 2 or 3 days, the grid just cannot keep up with the increased demand. Year over year, the population increases. We're seeing more and more demand for energy, and the grid just has not quite kept up with that. So this is something that we need to think about a little bit more as the years go on in terms of our winter weather preparedness. So that's a bit of, what we've seen the last 2 to 3 years or so, but what's happening out there right now? Well, luckily, if you don't live in New Mexico or Southeast Colorado, things are pretty quiet out there. New Mexico, however, dealing with winter storm warnings. There's been some multi-vehicle accidents east of Albuquerque on I-40. Parts of the interstate are shut down as of midday on this Thursday. So certainly I-25, I-40, if you have travel interests around there, be on the lookout through tonight. But really, we've been pretty lucky the last week or so. The U.S. is rather quiet and inactive. The one thing I will say, if you're anywhere from Florida through the Carolinas going into the weekend and even into the mid-Atlantic on Sunday into Monday, there is going to be a very heavy rainmaker and a windstorm that's going to be coming out of the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Could be some flood watches, some wind warnings, and things like that. So just a heads up there, we do have a situation report out on that storm. If we advance to the next slide, you'll see this is the outlook in terms of national temperatures on the left, precipitation on the right. There's really no indication over the next 10 days that there's going to be any notable persistent cold to speak of. In fact, near record warm temperatures over the Midwest on into southern Canada. Now, the one caveat here, there's a very strong Pacific jet stream getting going midway between China and the west coast of the United States. Long-range indications are elements of this northern Pacific jet will start to approach upon California as we get closer towards Christmas, and then it could remain active for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So although it's been dry in California, look for the lowland rain and the mountain snow chances to steadily pick up as we round out December and start the week or start the month of January. Rest of the U.S., though, looking pretty quiet in terms of winter weather threats for the next 5 to 10 days. Now, for the big thing that everyone's been waiting for, what is the overall 3-month outlook through the rest of winter? So we're still dealing with a very strong El Nino. In fact, this is one of the strongest El Ninos that we're seeing in the Pacific in the last 20 to 30 years. So that's above normal water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, if you think about the area west of South America. These water temperatures do have an overall impact on the weather pattern throughout the northern hemisphere. And the big takeaway here is the subtropical jet stream, which you see represented by that arrow on the bottom part of your screen. It's usually very active during an El Nino year. So from California all the way through northern Mexico, Texas, into the southeast, usually you have frequent storm systems, above normal rainfall. And, we haven't seen that much in California yet. But again, the pattern is showing signs of change into the final week of December into January. And already across the southeast, we really need a wetter pattern because we're coming off of drought. but we have a big storm system getting going across Florida this weekend, and this is likely to be the first of many that we see over the next couple of months. Now, across the Pacific Northwest and the northern plains, usually the northern stream of the jet stream is a little anchored farther north, so it tends to be a little bit warmer and drier. So that's what the overall trend is, at least quite often during an El Nino. Not every El Nino is the same, but this is about what we can anticipate. And so with that, on the next slide, we can see the latest NOAA winter weather forecast. We'll be getting another update in late December, but overall warmer and drier than normal from the Pacific Northwest all the way into the Great Lakes and the Northeast. But with the more active subtropical jet stream, areas from California eastward, especially into the Southeast where they need the rain, likely to be above normal. And I'm sure your big question is, okay, so what about the snowfall? Really hard to say, to be honest with you. The seasonal forecasts, you have to take them a bit with a grain of salt, but could be more freezing rain, sleet, and snow events, especially across the Tennessee Valley. And then I think the real interesting part of the country this year is going to be the Mid-Atlantic, maybe lower portions of the Northeast, as some of these southeastern storm systems try to round up the East Coast. So we'll see on that. Areas farther north, though, trending at least drier and warmer than normal. But you can still have, obviously, a couple big winter winter weather systems mixed in between is what I'm trying to say there. So key takeaways: Pacific Northwest and Northern Plains, again, likely warmer and drier than average. California for a second winter in a row, though, likely to be above normal in terms of precipitation. Really, January into February should be wetter than what we've seen in the past few weeks. And then Southeast is really going to be the busiest part of the country with above normal precipitation. Could be more severe thunderstorm events on the warm side of these systems. And then on the north side of these fronts, maybe some more wintry weather events across parts of the Mid-South and then especially on into the Mid-Atlantic. So again, greater frequency of Southeast and Mid-Atlantic winter storm setups could be observed beginning late December on into January. So that's kind of what things look like on the weather forecast front. In terms of preparation, let's see what we have yet to come here.
Absolutely, Jason. Wow, it's just wonderful to have such a knowledgeable person here. Thank you so much for that. Sara, how about we talk some impacts so people can better prepare their businesses and organizations. So Sara, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. All right, let's start with your people. Obviously, that's going to be your most important resource. Certainly so much to think about as far as concerns when we think about everything that Jason talked about, not only from last season, but everything we can expect in the months to come. So we've got some important stats really that we wanted to highlight here when you think about keeping your workers safe. First off, the U.S. Department of Transportation says that more than 1,300 people are killed each year in vehicle crashes on roadways that are in particular affected by winter weather. Obviously, we know the roadways are really dangerous, but really pointing to that statistic there. And then additionally, we've got a stat here from the National Council of Compensation Insurance. They found that worker compensation claims cost around $49,000 per fall. Both these numbers kind of off the top are pretty staggering. They really paint a picture of the impact we can see for in-office, on-site employees, employees that commute to different locations, things that can happen as you're entering or exiting a building, really kind of focusing on those snowy and icy conditions. And then when it comes to fatalities, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that more than 40% of weather-related deaths at work are related to sleet, ice, and snow. So again, really kind of supporting the fact that the winter season can be pretty deadly, unfortunately, as we kind of look to prepare our employees, kind of workplaces across the environments. Winter weather can also have an impact on your employees' mental health. I know this can go kind of unnoticed or maybe underreported, but the National Weather Service tells us that 10 million Americans are impacted by some form of what they call seasonal affective disorder every year. That's obviously a really huge number. And as much as we take into consideration all of the physical things that can happen to our employees, it's obviously really important to take into consideration mental health, especially as we get into a season where we know that obviously, again, based on these numbers, we could have some more challenges for our employees. And then finally, when winter weather does strike, as we all know, schools tend to close, leaving many parents without childcare, therefore, of course, spending a lot of time away from work or maybe having to multitask, productivity lost due to school closures, as well as things like public transportation interruptions and other service disruptions is absolutely going to have an impact to the workforce as we get into these winter months. And remember, obviously, even though your offices and your locations may not be located in traditionally cold regions, as we see the workforce continue to evolve, we know that a lot of employees working remotely might be subjected to different conditions that are in different offices. So they'll obviously be looking to you, your business, and your leaders for any sort of guidance on any sort of impacts from winter weather. All right. Beyond the people, let's go ahead and take a look at the potential impacts to your business. Obviously, core to the bottom line. When we think about fallen trees or system failures, those are obviously a lot of results for winter storms that can often really direct towards power outages. And when we think about business continuity, you of course have to think about what it means if your workers can't physically do their jobs, obviously without electricity, how they're going to communicate, how you will communicate them to them with the power out. We think back to 2022, a winter storm that downed thousands of power lines across just the state of Texas. That one left 70,000 people without power. So obviously a huge impact personally to people, but of course professionally as well for a lot of workers who work from home or workers who weren't able to get into offices due to those power disruptions. Frozen and busted pipes are another major concern. Burst pipes, of course, can cause flooding, water damage, other structural issues too. So again, think about how your employees could work or will be able to work from offices if we do have those sorts of concerns. This is obviously a home office and a work office concern. And then Jason hit on this earlier. There has been an increase in the energy crisis over the past few winters or winter seasons. There's been a huge focus put on this. I know we all hear about this in the headlines during the winter storm. I think it was Uri back in 2021. The cold temperatures overwhelmed the power grid in Texas in particular. That impacted the water treatment plants. It forced thousands of people to live without things like heat, water, and power for days on end. So definitely something we're paying close attention to, and of course, things that you should pay close attention to depending on where your workforce is. And even if energy providers can keep up with the cold, organizations will still likely be faced with higher utility bills to keep facilities warm and running properly. I know we continue to see that dip in the temperatures and everything that it impacts. And then another important stat to point out, freezes and winter storms can cause upwards of $6 billion with a B dollars in damages annually. So of course, really taking note as we get into the winter season to minimize risk when it comes to winter weather is of course going to be a top priority. I know for everybody, one of the major reasons I know y'all are tuning in. Beyond the impacts to people and business, I also wanted to make sure that we highlight some of these secondary impacts. Some of these things I think can go maybe underreported or unnoticed. A sad reality with winter weather events is that the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning definitely increases. Of course, when it gets cold out and the power goes out, a lot of people turn to generators for heat and electricity. And there's a lot of improper use when we think about generators. There's a lot of outdated generators that get used over time too, which can of course contribute to those fatalities. So once again, this is a big one where you want to think about your remote workforce who may be using generators to run their home heating frequently when they may have power outages. Again, just kind of pointing to some stats, the CDC every year says that around 430 people die due to CO poisoning, and then around another 50,000 people in the US actually visit the emergency department, each year due to the same, due to CO poisoning. So definitely something to take into consideration. We also look at the risks associated with people shoveling, using snow blowers, icing sidewalks either at home or even on work sites. There's obviously a high risk there as we think about slips and falls. Obviously, we mentioned earlier, those worker compensation claims can really tick up when it comes to costs as well. I'm guilty of this one, and I know a lot of other people are as well, consistently using space heaters for additional warmth during the winter months. People use these both at home as well as in the workplace. Huge fire hazard if not used properly. I know a lot of structure fires in particular during the winter season end up being attributed to kind of improper use. So something to keep top of mind for yourself and your workforce as well. Supply chain, again, just another big one we continue to think around when we think about what's happening around the globe. Of course, the conflicts going on in Russia and Ukraine, as well as the Middle East now, everyday essentials could go out of stock. It's a really important time to kind of take note of what kinds of supplies you need at your office, as well as maybe encouraging your remote workers as well to take notice of things that they may need at home. Of course, to stock up now is the time as we get into these winter months and seasons. And then if you do experience structural or network damage from winter weather, chances are, of course, that contractors, repair people, folks that service cable and internet, those folks are going to be in high demand too. So obviously, taking note of the fact that when there are service disruptions or outages, these are the months where there could be greater outages or downtime due to the fact that there is just that crush on the system. The Harvard Business Review reports that extreme winter weather disrupts the operating and financial performance of 70% of businesses worldwide, due to, both primary and secondary impacts. So a lot of these things that we've talked about. So of course, the more prepared you and your teams are when we hit the winter months, the more resilient you and your company can be, both for in-office as well as employees that are working remotely, by proximity of sharing this sort of information too. All right, we talked about some of this earlier, but I think it's worth diving into because it's so incredibly important. Every organization should really consider how winter weather events are going to impact different types of workers. So starting with on-site and in-office workers, some good questions to really ask yourself as we get into the season are, how will you keep them safe on their commutes to and from work? How well and how often are you winterizing your building? Obviously, that's inside as well as outside, right? Sidewalks, parking lots, walkways. Then you've got your traveling workers. They, of course, could experience any sort of inclement weather due to different winter weather conditions while they're on business trips around the globe. So thinking of ways to make sure that you're protecting and proactively alerting them if there's any sort of disruptions that they might face, and of course, being able to manage those once they are in some sort of situation too. Remote workers, we talk about a lot. They could experience any number of impacts that we've discussed, whether that's something happening at home, power outages, trips and falls, frozen pipes, lack of supplies and vendors, as well as more. And then your outdoor workers are obviously the most vulnerable when we think about cold stress or injuries and illness, which means that we, of course, as business leaders really need to evaluate and assess their working conditions, even like their clothing, their uniforms, how they're going to stay warm kind of in between jobs or different situations as well. And then lastly, thinking about lone workers, they kind of sit on that island by themselves. These are the folks that are maybe transporting themselves from one place to another on their own for a job. They probably are working in environments with no heat, outside where conditions can be icy and snowy. So working on ways to minimize risk or just create awareness for them on different conditions that they might be facing due to the different forecasts in different areas. Okay, I know that's a lot, Katie. I will turn it back to you because I think we want to do another audience poll.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. It's a great time for a poll. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and launch this poll. This time we're asking you, which of these scenarios are you least prepared for as winter approaches? So is it maybe those power or network outages we talked about? Maybe protecting workers from cold-related illness and injury? Limited supplies and vendors, or maybe providing resources for workers experiencing seasonal disorders, or maybe it's those energy crises and rising energy costs. So again, which of these scenarios are you least prepared for currently? All right, let me give that just a couple more seconds. So you got some answers still coming in here. All right, let's go ahead and end that poll and share the results. I mean, once again, everything is, represented here, and nothing is really standing out as much higher than the others, but power or network outages is our number one, followed closely by the energy crises and rising energy costs. Sara, let me just go to you first. Is that a surprise to you at all?
No, not really. And actually, I think this just gets to one of the points that I know Jason kind of hinted on earlier and that I hit on too. It's just the infrastructure, right? There's a lot of concerns over infrastructure. And I think the fact that the power and the network outages and energy crises and rising energy costs just kind of gets at both of those.
Jason, anything additional to add?
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the trend that we've seen the last few years with more in the way of calls for conservation, rolling blackouts, both during the winter months and during the summer months. They're both kind of correlated there.
That makes sense. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that poll. Now we're going to move on to some best practices for preparing your people and business. So Jason, if you could please walk us through some tips on how to prepare and protect. And then Sara, I think, has some advice on communication that she'll follow up with.
Yeah, Katie, that sounds good. We'll start off with, what are some of the things that you should be doing to protect your people? And first off, now is the time to formulate or review your plan. Mother Nature has kind of brought us a little bit more time than we would expect getting into mid-December. It's been somewhat quiet, at least for most of the country so far. But you really want to finalize those plans before those winter storm watches are ever issued. And then you want to communicate that preparedness plan to all the employees, provide that transparency. Sometimes they can speak to flaws of the plan on their own and maybe help kind of figure out some things on their end. And then send out winter weather tips and forecasts. Don't forget to consider your different worker types and communicate the information that would be most helpful to them. And I think that the part of that is conveying the forecast that you're getting from official sources, because we all have busy lives, but sometimes it doesn't really hit home until it starts getting talked about in the workplace, and that's when the situation is maybe worth paying a little bit more attention to when it comes to these winter storm impacts that could be imminent. You can also include employees in the discussion to learn about any gaps. We've already kind of talked about that, but also encourage employees to devise their own winter weather preparedness plan. If their own families are not prepared, they may not be available for you in terms of, securing things on the company side of things. So this is a multifaceted approach. You also need to think about family and friends during these situations. And then have employees work from home during severe weather whenever possible. Some of the biggest impacts that we see from these winter storms are on the roadways. We're seeing that today in New Mexico. If there is at least the ability to work from home, by all means, whenever there's a winter weather advisory and especially winter storm warnings, I would highly recommend that. When it comes to OSHA guidance, this is often sometimes we think about during the summer months. There are regulations in place. Once temperatures get to a certain threshold, we don't quite have those standards in place for wintry weather just yet, but there are some strongly worded recommendations coming from OSHA that we should keep in mind. First and foremost, we need to be mindful of those wind chill temperatures, especially across the northern half of the country. I mean, when you start talking -20, -40 below zero, you can have hypothermia set in within as little as 15 to even 5 minutes. So you really need to consider the outdoor worker in situations like that. And even in the South, when the National Weather Service issues things like wind chill advisories, they also consider how abnormal it is for the region to be experiencing such temperatures. So if a wind chill warning is issued for places like Alabama and it doesn't seem quite as extreme to you if you're living in the northern US, just keep in mind that the criteria is adjusted and sometimes the adaptability is a little bit more difficult for the South when you're not used to such temperatures. And, basic things like assign work during the warmest part of the day, avoid those morning time lows, and direct employees to work in pairs. That way there's more eyes on the situation and less chance of things going wrong. So those are just a few ideas. I definitely encourage everyone to take a closer look at some of this OSHA guidance once we're all said and done with today. And then in terms of preparing and protecting your business, of course, inspect those structures and make repairs now. Year after year, we do see reports of vulnerable roofs that may have had some damage beforehand that end up collapsing during the weight of snow. We even saw some homes in the Intermountain West have roof collapses due to the extreme snow rates that we're seeing last year. You want to move all the important equipment and vehicles to secure areas and winterize your doors and windows just to make sure that you're as energy as efficient as possible. Another big one, monitor weather sites and other resources for the most up-to-date information. Can't stress it enough, weather.gov, the National Weather Service, they issue the official watches and warnings. The weather forecast can change rapidly during this time of the year. What may not seem like a big deal becomes a big deal in terms of icy roadways that morning. So it's almost a 24/7 type thing to be mindful of weather impacts during the winter weather months. But those are just some basic tips. Sarah, back over to you for more.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So look, a great way to really help keep your people and your property and your business safe is by proactively monitoring for such events like this, obviously winter weather, but really monitoring for any sort of kind of tragic natural disaster or weather and just incidents in general. So having a solution where you can quickly understand the expected impact of a storm based on geographic footprint, if your organization, your people, and your assets is really going to be essential. This is really going to help you identify emergent threats faster and then be able to respond real time with automated impact assessments and warnings to your people, maybe your team leaders, who can really help to support your business as well as employees in whatever fashion they are kind of located for your teams. We here at AlertMedia are super incredibly lucky to have a team of meteorologists that work with Jason each and every day to really help our customers to understand any sort of severe weather that could be happening in their area or coming towards their area so that they can prepare, so that they can create the right communications, the right kind of plans for their ecosystems for anybody who could potentially be impacted. So really great to be able to have kind of that support as we do here at AlertMedia, and just excited to continue to bring that to folks in our customer ecosystem. Speaking of communication, it's of course super critical when you think about these winter weather scenarios. The way that we think a lot of these is really from that before, during, and after approach. So this is how we really approach communication best practices as well. So when you're thinking about it from that before perspective, developing storms obviously can be coming at you at any given point in time. It's really a great time for you to be able to proactively warn your people as soon as you know that some sort of storm may be on the horizon. Also a good time, of course, to inform your people of any sort of office delays or closures, or maybe plans that you already have in place as you see something kind of coming down the pipeline. Of course, informing workers that might be outdoor, that maybe their schedule changes or work changes due to that impending weather that's coming. And then you also want to ensure that your people have the resources they need to prepare, to obviously get ready for a storm, but also in the event that there's any sort of recovery after. And then most importantly, really, again, being able to educate your employees on how to protect themselves as well as your business. That middle column there, really kind of during the course of a storm, you're going to want to, of course, alert your employees of any outages or any sorts of disruptions to normal business operations in the event maybe you have some sort of network outage. Of course, providing support to employees who might not be able to access critical business systems to do their work, maybe redundancies in place, of course. Checking in with employees. You can obviously use surveys to check in on their safety as well as their capabilities, whether they're home or in other office locations. And then also a good time to check on your people with surveys, wellness checks to understand their safety and circumstances. And then two, communicating any knowledge locally for maybe closures, whether those are schools, roadways, anything else that could impact maybe business or life in their areas. And then, of course, just as important, after a storm passes, you can utilize communication to provide resources to aid anyone who needs it, whether they're in your local community or in other communities. Again, a great time to survey people about their safety as well as their ability to kind of perform their normal work duties. And then if you have remote employees, you can, of course, inquire. Maybe you want to do a survey about whether or not they have power capabilities, what their internet capability is, and maybe just even their personal circumstances. We all know that storms can really have a heavy toll. So being able to check in on people. And then, of course, offices, when we think about our employees who are in offices after a storm, we want to make sure that we level set expectations if offices have been closed, when things are opening back up, and really when operations are going to be back to normal. So communication really through each one of these phases is truly key to keep your employees safe and connected, as well as your business recovery efforts really where you need them to be. And with that, I will toss it back to Katie because I think we have one more poll we wanted to conduct.
Yes, it is poll time. How did you know? So thank you for that, Sarah. And I want to get to some audience questions, and we also have some additional resources for you guys. But I do want to launch this final poll right now. It's going to be really quick. You know, you've heard from two of AlertMedia's subject matter experts today, Sara and Jason, but we'd love for you to take advantage of our full team of experts. So just let us know, are you interested in learning more about how AlertMedia can help with your winter weather preparedness and communications? You can tell us yes, and we will get you some more information. You can also say no, thank you, and that's okay too. So I'm going to give that just a couple more seconds. I see some folks are still answering. So that is great. Keep it coming. And I think now let's go ahead and end this poll because we have some questions coming in, and I want to make sure we get to those. All right, guys, you can use that Q&A box just as a reminder. And also, they don't have to be questions. If you have a statement or a scenario that you want to share or a piece of advice to offer, you can throw that in there as well. So kind of anything goes here in the Q&A box. But I'm going to start with you, Jason. How has technology improved winter weather forecasting in recent years?
It's a good question, and I would say we've seen some pretty sizable advancements, especially within the past 10 years or so. Within the past decade, the NOAA NEXTRAD radar network across the country was upgraded to dual pol. And without getting into the weeds there, this new technology is allowing us to differentiate between what could be rain, sleet, and snow. It's one thing to be able to just read weather observations from on the ground, but in those areas where we don't have the weather observations, we can use this high resolution dual pol radar imagery to determine exactly what the precipitation type is. For areas that are more rural or especially out in the middle of the oceans, we do have higher resolution GOES satellite imagery that was recently implemented, and that helps fill in some of the pieces of the puzzle to the forecast, especially when we're talking 3 to 5 to 5+ days in advance. So we've seen some pretty big strides there. And also, even though this wasn't specifically asked, if anyone is kind of wondering what I think the biggest development is going to be over the next 1 to 2 years, it may be a little bit more in the way of machine learning models that we're already kind of starting to hear about in recent months.
Excellent. Well, Jason, I'm going to stick with you. We have two different questions coming in regarding extreme cold versus extreme heat and the danger of that. We've been told by forecasters all year that extreme heat is here to stay, and it's likely just to get worse in coming years. So do you expect the same for extreme cold? And do you consider one more dangerous than the other?
I wouldn't say that one is more dangerous than the other. Both should be taken seriously. I think in terms of trends year over year, especially if we look at the past 30 years or so, heat waves are definitely outpacing cold air outbreaks. We're seeing more record warm temperatures versus daily record cold temperatures and so on and so forth. But at the same time, even if our winters are averaging to be a little bit warmer on average, I mean, last year is just the perfect example. You can have 2/3 of the country that is warmer for 3 months, if you kind of account for the entire season. But yet there's still major snowstorms, major Arctic outbreaks, polar vortex intrusions. Even if they last for 3 to 5 days, they can be just as impactful, if not more so. In terms of heat waves, I think we're going to continue to see those getting worse, and I'm sure 2024 will have more of those in our future, unfortunately.
No. Okay, Sarah, I have one for you. Communicating before, during, and after a storm sounds like a lot. How do we avoid communication fatigue with our employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that slide has a lot of information on it. It can sound like a lot. There's a lot of opportunities, obviously, to communicate. I would say a few things. I think if employees understand the business continuity plans and they understand that there's information that's going to be coming to them, you can kind of pace that out. Most employees and most organizations want to be able to alert people as soon as possible that there's some sort of system or storm that could impact business. So I think when you start early, people are kind of expecting maybe a more consistent flow of information, so may have more of an appetite for more messaging. And then some of our customers actually, they'll leverage kind of like a landing page or an event page to update information on different storms and systems, and might reserve the right to actually push notifications to their employees when there's something more important, like there is something more devastating that could be coming their way, or they do want them to take more action. So kind of splitting it up where you've got a bunch of information that you give to your employees that's in a place where they can go and find it and see updates, and then maybe just reserving those communications for things that may be a little bit more immediate.
That makes a lot of sense. And we actually had a question come in while you were talking about communication. What is the best platform to communicate with employees? We sometimes struggle using iPhone to text our employees.
I think it depends on the employee population. I think it's knowing your employee population probably too. A lot of people these days aren't sitting in front of a computer, right? So they're not necessarily going to be looking actively through an email portal or things like that. Obviously, people do have smartphones. People are, obviously looking at their phones a lot more personally and professionally. I feel like having multiple channels kind of set up can really help for redundancy purposes, especially if you're trying to share information that's incredibly important, right? I know some of our customers will send stuff to email that might not be as pertinent or important in the moment, maybe something that they want to share, where they're using text messages a lot more, even WhatsApp pushes, depending on where their employees are, to make sure that that immediacy is there, that they're getting things more immediately.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sarah. Jason, this might be putting you on the spot, so just let me know if it is. But some folks, we have some Canadians in the audience today. Do you have anything specific that you might be able to say to those folks about their forecast?
Yeah,
if not,
I
we
think
can follow up with them later. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. No, I think for a lot of the southern tier of the country, it's going to be quite similar to the Northeast and Great Lakes forecast. On average, you might be a little bit warmer and drier than normal, but at the same time, right now, if we took a global snapshot of temperatures, all the cold air is focused across Siberia and the Russian and Asian side. That's probably going to continue through at least the end of the month. Even into January and February, we're probably going to average warmer than normal. But at some point during the season, I would estimate that we should see at least more Arctic air intrusions on our side of the North Pole, getting into Canada and then occasionally into the lower 48 of the US. So although it's on average warmer and drier than normal, there's always the caveat there. There will be more Arctic intrusions more than likely into January and February. And then out across the western part of Canada, they've already had some pretty sizable winter storms, especially near and west of Calgary. We think that the Pacific Northwest active pattern that we had within the last couple of weeks is steadily shifting more towards California. But of course, there will be those, 3 to 5 day fluctuations in the pattern in which, British Columbia, Alberta, similar areas can still get into the fold quite easily.
Thank you. And then can you clarify for those of us who aren't familiar what an atmospheric river is?
Yeah, so the simplest way to think of it is, the jet stream acts as these waterways in the atmosphere to channel all of this deep tropical moisture from the warmer than normal waters of the Pacific, especially during an El Nino year when the equatorial Pacific is already running warmer than normal. You usually have a stronger jet stream that's over the central and northern mid latitudes of the Pacific. And then when you get the subtropical jet that starts to become better established over California, it's often also called the Hawaiian Express when it comes in from that part of the Pacific Ocean, where there's a lot of just deep moisture. Integrated vapor transport is one of the more technical terms that we talk about behind the scenes, and that's how we measure the strength of these atmospheric rivers. But you're just funneling a lot of that Pacific moisture into the mountains. You're getting more, snowfall and lowland rainfall due to these atmospheric landfalling river situations.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for that clarification. And then, Jason, sticking with you, we have a couple of folks asking about recommended resources. So outside of National Weather Service and NOAA, do you recommend other weather services that you're able to share? And then I'll read the second one too, just so you can answer together. What is the best resource for easily understood weather info besides just our local station?
Yeah, I mean, I still, even with that caveat, still have to refer to the National Weather Service. They will always be the official watch warning agency. Another division of NOAA, though, is the Weather Prediction Center. They also issue more of the larger scale overviews of weather across the country over 3 to 7 days. So if you want to get a little bit more technical, just do a quick Google search, NOAA Weather Prediction Center, and click on the winter weather tab. They'll have a little bit more detail for you. And if you happen to be an AlertMedia customer, we're synthesizing a lot of this information, not just the info coming from NOAA, but also forecast models, the American GFS, European ECMWF, putting all these different bits of information, different sources into one readable outline every single day from our team of meteorologists. So I have to plug us a little bit, sorry.
No, that's perfect. And there's a comment here that I wanted to read as well, because I think this is important. When we were talking about some of those hazards for winter weather, our friend Brian says, in every place I have worked, it is common for employees to discreetly bring space heaters to work and hide them in confined spaces, which is obviously very dangerous, like under desks, near waste baskets, etc. Frequent checks and keeping the building at a reasonable temperature can help with this. Totally agree. Thank you for that, Brian.
That latter part is key, keeping your building at a reasonable temperature. We hear from people a lot that work in offices that are very cold. So you're just asking for your employees to try and bring in these heating devices.
All right. Looks like we have time for about one more question. Jason, would you consider winter to hang in through March or possibly an early spring weather return this season?
It's a good question. I think it's a little bit more of a dicier forecast than normal because right now we're dealing with almost a supercharged El Nino. It's kind of peaking in intensity across the Pacific right now. But as we get towards the second half of winter into spring, long-range models indicate that this El Nino pattern could rapidly weaken. And so we could be in a very, difficult to forecast transition stage as we get into early spring. So hate to take the easy way out, but I think the forecast becomes more uncertain once we get beyond the next 3 months.
Oh, man. Well, fair enough. Okay, and then just one more comment here from our friend Tom. He says the local NOAA office for the DC metro area offers 2 weekly weather updates that you can subscribe to. Tom also says with our AlertMedia setup, we can do cell call messages, landline messages, and email to work accounts. So we try to maximize advisory coverage. So thank you, Tom. You gave us a little tip there for a resource and for multi-channel notifications. So you win the prize today. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, if we did not get to your question, I will let you know how you can get in touch with Sara and Jason a little later on in the presentation. But right now, I did want to offer you get those additional resources we talked about before. So if you're looking for additional information to help you prepare for winter weather, we highly recommend downloading AlertMedia's free winter weather preparation and response checklist, as well as the winter weather communication templates. And yes, you heard that right. Those are free at alertmedia.com. So check those out. And then at this time, I would just like to thank Jason Moreland and Sara Pratley for joining us today. You can find them both on LinkedIn under their full names if you would like to connect with them after the presentation today. So Jason, I just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today and offering us these excellent insights.
No problem. Thanks to everyone that tuned in today, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you have a specific question about winter weather preparedness.
Wonderful. And Sara, thank you so much as well. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate it. And again, huge thanks to Jason. Love the expertise. I know our customers do too.
Wonderful. Well, that concludes our presentation today. I hope you all feel at least a little bit more prepared for the winter season this year. Thank you for spending time with us today. And please join us on another AlertMedia webinar. You have no idea how much we love going through registration lists and seeing familiar names. So we really appreciate that. And then don't forget, we're going to send you a recording of this webinar via email. It's also going to have a webinar survey link inside it. We hope you'll participate in that. And that's all we got. So thank you again so much, and we hope you have a great day.